Well, good morning. It is just about 8 o'clock, so we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today for our first official virtual Eggs and Issues. We're very glad to continue our programming and especially continue with this program as we have such great information. Our sponsor today is Draper Aiden. We're very thankful for them and their continued support of the Chamber, especially as we pivot during COVID-19. So I'd like to introduce Carolyn Howard to speak a little bit about what they do at Draper Aiden.
Thank you. Do you have our presentation to show?
Yes, ma'am. That's what I'm pulling up right now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm Ms. Carolyn Howard, and I've been with Draper Aiden Associates for 15 years now, and we have grown quite a bit over the last 4 years. We are now a firm of, you can go to the next slide, of about 350 employees, and we have offices 6 in Virginia and 2 in North Carolina. Our economic development team, we have 350 employees to help us. The main people in our economic development team are Deborah Filippo. She is our program manager. She is currently on the board of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. And I've been working with her on VEDP projects for several years now. And we're particularly getting sites ready for prospects to come in and build and bring jobs into the community. Next slide, please. You go on to the next one. I've already introduced the firm. We have a lot of different services. A couple of things I'd like to highlight here really quickly are aerial services. We do have an FAA pilot who can actually do aerial photography over airports and restricted areas. So that's really exciting for us to have that level of expertise in our firm. Next slide, please. We do a wide range of work to support economic development projects throughout the Commonwealth, helping with site selections, with prospects, to administering the Virginia Business Ready Sites program, and that's, I'm sure John might talk about that here, and doing designs to actually bring the sites ready for prospects to come in and build their buildings. Next slide, please. Another key component of our economic development program is brownfields. Brownfields are our redevelopment sites, are the hidden gems in each community that can bring out economic development in communities. Just go ahead and look at our neighbors at the town of Pulaski and what they've done with their downtown. That all was done with brownfields. That started, the catalyst was brownfields. Go forward, please. We've worked on a wide range of projects throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. I mentioned the town of Pulaski, but our work goes all the way over, extends into the peninsula of Virginia and up into the northern Shenandoah Valley. Continue. We also work with regional EDOs throughout the Commonwealth, and they're listed here, as well as VEDP. Continue on. I know our time is short, so I'm trying to go through this quickly. One of the projects we worked on recently is a master plan for Western Virginia Regional Industrial Facilities Authority, known as the Woodhaven Road parcel. And many of you might know this site more as it's at the southwest corner of I-81 and 581 in Roanoke County. So it's a big greenfield that's looking to develop into industrial site. Also, if you've traveled down I-77 near exit 19 is Wildwood Commerce Park. It is a completely graded ready site for a prospect. One of the things that I know John is working on through Go Virginia Region 2 is development of staff and workforce. And one of the reasons why this park has not seeing develop yet is because of the lack of workforce in the Carroll Grayson Alex area, with the previously low unemployment that we had prior to today. And at Trick Brain Associates, I will conclude here by saying that it's our passion to help communities and provide a lasting positive impact. And these are our core values, and we really live those. And we appreciate the opportunity here to share with you a little bit about our expertise in economic development in the Commonwealth. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And we're really pleased to be part of this Eggs and Issues in the Montgomery County Chamber. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carolyn. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Scott to introduce our speaker for today.
Good morning. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. As we emerge and look forward to the future, I think it's important for us to understand that our community is different. And I've shared that with all of our senators, our congressmen, certainly our state leaders. We're unique in that Virginia Tech is the economic engine in our community. Love it or challenged by that fact, it's true. So what that economic engine does impacts every single business in this community. To that effect, it was important for me to try to get an understanding of what does the future look like for us as an economy? What is the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's in the middle there? And I thought about who would be the best speaker for this, and obviously it was John Provo. John has his Ph.D. in urban studies from Portland State University. He also has his BA from William and Mary. He teaches an economic development studio at Virginia Tech as a professor there. And he is one of the coolest geeks I know. That's a compliment, John. If you've ever had a conversation with John, it's like watching gears and all of this stuff going on when you ask a question. His mind is just grabbing at pieces of how do we put this together so that it's functional. So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce a friend, a former colleague, and someone that I respect a great deal, John Provo, who is the director for the Office of Economic Development at Virginia Tech. Thank you, John.
Oh, golly, Sharon, thank you. I don't know if the lighting here will show how much I'm blushing with that introduction. And hopefully, you know, one of the things we can do today is put the gears in a way slow enough that they'll actually come across on Zoom, because I don't know if the thought bubble is going to be like right out of frame for my camera or whatever. I don't know about some of you, but I've got teenage kids at home. So I have discovered in the last couple of weeks that mornings are hard and how much of our rhythm is set by school kids and their schedules. But you know what? Once I actually opened my eyes and you know, walked outside and saw that big moon this morning, I was very happy to get my geek on with y'all, and really appreciate the chance to think about some things. And I'm going to pull my screen up so you will have a presentation. And there we are. Okay. And voila, very good. So I guess, Sharon kind of took care of this in the introduction, but definitely a PhD, not an MD, not an epidemiologist or anything like that. But I am really happy to have the opportunity to diagnose some things as we go forward with respect to the economy. Sharon shared a number of things about me. I'll just put in at the top here a quick plug. I know my colleague Ellie Travis is on the line, who is involved in the chamber through some things she's doing in Christiansburg. But our office at Virginia Tech is a part of helping you and helping economic developers and helping others find things. Those magic widgets on campus that we can put to good use in the economy. But we're also there with some support from a number of different sources to provide insights and analysis based on what's going on, and to really help think about how to move forward from good times and bad. I got to be honest, not only was remembering what it was like to get up at a normal hour challenging. I don't want to oversell that. I'm working an 8-hour day, I promise. But the news is so dizzying at this point. And I'll be honest, Sharon, I have not stressed about a talk in quite a while, but I think I've written like 4 different versions of this one because, frankly, the news and what you can actually put your finger on in terms of real data has shifted from week to week. Really, the first honest admission anybody coming to talk to you about the economy and as we poke our heads out to see if the groundhog has seen his shadow or whatnot, has to be honest, is that there's a heck of a lot of stuff that we don't know right now. Whether it's, the fact that we're dealing with a public health issue that, the only precedent would be like 1918, or the fact that we're dealing with an economic issue whose closest precedent is from like the 30s. That is weird territory for us to try to forecast from. And there's also, the era of the internet and the amount of kind of noise and confusion in trying to understand information. We've got more information than ever, but we have less and less clarity about how to read it. So, one of the things that I often do try to make a focus, both in the work of the office and when I teach, is to really think about how to help people read data, how to help people be consumers of data. An educated consumer is a happy consumer, I think. And so what I thought would be most useful today is kind of outlined in the 3 parts of the talk here. So I want to talk a little bit about forecasting and data, and talk a little bit about what we do and don't know, and limitations and things that you should be looking for as you consume information in the weeks to come. Wanted to talk a little bit about what's already happened in terms of response to the economic disaster, but things that I think we can anticipate that should be of help to you and your communities and your business work, and then some longer term things that we should be working on together. And then I will dabble in the Twitterverse a little bit and talk about some trends that are being points of focus. Some of these you've already probably experienced in your own business, but others we're talking about now, I think collectively, and I think we need to get ready to to address. So forecasting, right? We see lots of published forecasts. We see lots of models, we see a lot of people using those words interchangeably. And, they actually mean different things. A forecast, I think in a technical sense, will often be more about a clearly defined set of variables, right? We'll be forecasting certain markets, we'll be forecasting certain things like, like unemployment or employment growth or decline. A model is a more complex kind of thing where you take multiple variables, you take actions that we make as individual consumers, individual businesses, and you plug them into a series of things that give you outputs, whether it's about how much people drive or how much people spend. And it's I really yeah, and so I think it's important to understand whether you're talking about forecasts or modeling, that there are more assumptions based into any number you see that's not hard data. Anything that's labeled forecast has just stacks and stacks of assumptions. And remember what I said a minute ago, we're dealing with a situation right now where, a lot of our comps, if you will, I know we've got some real estate people on the call, right? The comparable experience we have to benchmark against are really hard to put data to, because frankly, in 1918 or in the Great Depression, we didn't have data about things that we do now. So we're really making a lot of educated guesses, but I think those forecasting models, whether you're talking about public health or the economy, all have a lot of assumptions baked into them, and that's one of the challenges of why there's so much divergence in some of these things. It's also really important to remember, particularly for the more complex modeling, they're snapshots, right? So if everybody suddenly changes their behaviors in response to the forecast or the prediction offered by a model, you're gonna see a different outcome, right? We flatten curves or bend or crush curves or whatever it is we've been trying to do, right, with the lockdown. A lot of this is different from weather forecasting because you do have a lot of variables in how the wind and the rain come and land on us, but they don't change in response to seeing the model itself, right? I mean, nature does what nature's going to do in that regard. So the role of the individuals and all of this data stuff is really important not to lose sight of. And I think, the other thing about individuals and all of us as human beings is that we crave certainty, right? I mean, I want to know that when I go to my light switch and flip it, AP will have gotten me some electricity. I want to know when I go to the grocery store this afternoon and pick up my stuff, the link sausages we asked for are actually going to be there, right? So I think I think that's important to understand why everybody's rushing to put some things out there. I until I found this pretty photo on our stock photo subscription for my office, I was going to put up a couple of curves. Economists like to talk about curves. I'm actually a planner, as mentioned, but I play an economist on TV, let's say. The biggest noise in the last 72 hours in economics Twitter has been these two radically different curves about predictions for future infection rate. And why they're radically different is because in one model, they pushed a different button to use a different statistical algorithm. And I guess I could have showed that up to sort of show up my economist friends, but I think this larger point about the limitations of forecasting and modeling is important. I think it's also important to realize that a lot of the data we collect is lagging data. So we get things from surveys of people who are filing unemployment claims. We get hard data about unemployment claims. We get other predictions based on forward-looking spending, things like that. So just that's a big chunk of the challenge in talking about any of this, and in thinking about what's the high, middle, low sort of future that Sharon was hoping we can start talking about. I know some of you have seen this as well. People talking about what kind of recession we're going to have. Literally every one of these, there's a different economic scenario behind every one of these letters, right? The V would be a pretty quick out. I think the first three are the ones that are maybe most commonly talked about. The V would be a pretty quick rebound. The U would be a pretty long, slow slog through the bottom of the U. The W is one that concerns a lot of folks, where we might have a rebound and then a second wave of disease, slowing up everybody's outward engagement with the economy, and another dip. And so, you're going to see people, this is a really simple way to think about some of the assumptions that people are putting into their various models and forecasts. I will say, if you, and I put a slide up for this, but if you look across forecasts around gross domestic product, Moody's, Wells Fargo, Wall Street Journal, starting, Q1 of 2020 through maybe an uptick in Q3, Q4, everybody pretty much agrees, a long, unprecedented, hard drop. And that might be as much as 22 to 30% of GDP nationally. And so, that's a big, scary number. And it's, again, I think important to think about how that starts to break down, because, we're a big, complicated country. We're a big, complicated state. If you start looking at hard data, the next few slides are going to be based on most recent initial unemployment claims. And, that's another one to think about, right? What does it even mean when they say an initial unemployment claim? So, somebody files and, it's not done there. I don't know if any of you had interaction with the system, but sometimes people have to file 2 or 3 times for a claim to get through the system. Sometimes, people kind of, drop out of this. So I think, and I think sometimes people are discouraged from ever even filing. So the unemployment claims, or the unemployment number, which we're going to have out soon, it's hard data. These are real individuals making an effort, but it is important to realize what goes into that, and that there may be some element either of, discourage folks not filing, or folks filing multiple times and being overcounted. Now, that said, you look at this map and the patterns aren't all obvious. I mean, you can see, 25% jump in Nevada shouldn't surprise anyone, right? I mean, if you think about what's the basis of the economy there, 21% in Washington State. I mean, this was one of the first states really hit. You see other tourist centers like New Orleans and other places where major cities have had big flare-ups. And that's important to think about too, because the interaction, and we have a unique economy, and yes, Virginia Tech is an anchor, but this region and Virginia Tech are also connected to larger centers, right? So as they have issues in those places, they can ripple out into broader swaths of the economy. Now, when you think about it from a kind of a regional basis, again, you can get a little more, we have a little better feel too for what goes on in the rest of the state. So whether it's, Middle Peninsula, hospitality, tourism, oyster harvesting economies, or manufacturing in Southern Virginia, these kind of numbers should perhaps make some sense. But again, the patterns aren't necessarily obvious, right? I mean, what's the commonality? Why is, Roanoke's slightly higher than the Newher Valley? I mean, in some respects, that's a little bit of, a percent is not like a big number in that regard. And there's a little bit of like statistical noise. In fact, this isn't my slide. I don't like, I get a little leery about talking about some of these numbers to the 10th decimal and such, because again, it suggests, I mean, unless you're measuring out chemicals in an experiment, that's a level of precision that say that we don't necessarily have in a lot of economic and planning activity. But I will say, and I want to give full credit. One of the other challenges that we've had is that Virginia is actually one of the states that until about 48 hours ago did not collect unemployment claims data at kind of a really granular level, either with this sort of local information like in this slide, or what VDP has compiled from this new Virginia Employment Commission data about occupations, and I'll show you industry in a second. So if you look at these numbers, again, we all read the news. These shouldn't be super surprising if you think about, if you look at the top half dozen of these, I know this represents where a lot of you are. This is your line of work. I do think if you look in the second sort of tier, the second half dozen, you see some things. You see some white collar occupations listed. You see healthcare, which I know was counterintuitive for some folks, but if you think about sort of shutting off everything but COVID treatment in healthcare, everything but emergency response in healthcare, it should make some sense. Production, we've seen some of our manufacturing lines idled. So this should not be too surprising. And the question of where it goes, we'll begin to put our heads up, as the governor's told us soon, and we may see, the composition of these numbers change. But there's a lot of it depends, and we're going to talk about those as well. This again should track with the other thing. You see your industry represented in there in some places, and for many of you, it's going to be on the higher end of this, and it's and these are just staggering challenges, and it's actually really also kind of important to really understand how much Main Street America is where this recession has begun. The housing market in the last recession led us to sort of different patterns in looking at where occupationally or industry-wise we started. Construction and other things would have been much higher on a chart like this in the 2008 recession. But I think these numbers should make sense. And again, these are initial unemployment claims. So you're looking at hard information about individuals. But again, there's still a little bit of noise in the data because of the way our unemployment system works and the data gets collected. I'm going to shift, and we can come back to all of this stuff about numbers and about forecasting and modeling, but I want to shift to I want to start looking ahead a little bit, right? And I think that, I know there's at least one person on this call with a great Florida background who has been through a number of hurricane scenarios. And there may be some folks here, when the tornadoes came through Pulaski a few years ago and other places, have seen what's involved in triaging these things. I know what is my cousin's my cousin's husband, well, some kind of an in-law, is with the Army Corps of Engineers, and he spent months and months in Puerto Rico as a part of response to the hurricanes and associated disasters down there. And this idea of sort of thinking about the stages of recovery, I think, is helpful. We all want to do everything at once because we're human beings, and we're driven, and particularly in a chamber audience, I know we've got entrepreneurs and people with entrepreneurial spirit who want to go. But if you think about what happens in a hurricane, you're sort of blown back pretty hard, and you have to look at this, I think, in stages, essentially. So that first idea about rescue is really meant to represent what's happened so far. So we've had programs like the Payroll Protection Act and the other loan programs. We've had extended unemployment created or enhanced unemployment, and it's the numbers in that have been different than in previous recessions, and also they've done some things to add the gig economy workers to have some eligibility, and the amount of dollars committed to this thing is kind of staggering. And the fact that we did this, Roosevelt put the New Deal together in 100 days, I guess. We've got the internet, so we did it faster. But in all of these instances, it shouldn't surprise any of us that there's unintended consequences, administrative confusion, and a lot of stress. I've got a family member with a small business in the county who had to go through 2 tranches to get through the payroll protection loan program, and I didn't check to see what bankers are on the line here, and I know they've all been stressing and working hard at this. I think it's gonna. But I'll tell you what, as a consumer of those banking services, she's going to remember, where they actually got through, and I think is going to be incredibly appreciative with her business going forward. So this, the unemployment insurance, I know folks are preemptively stressing about that. That's another weird artifact of how the systems work. So from state to state, every unemployment system is run a little bit differently. The computers they run on, however, tend to be really antique systems. Henry Bass, we need to get on this. You're talking about like COBOL programming and things that were invented for green screens and dot matrix printers back in the day, I guess. I'm sort of lumping all some things together by way of a joke, but they weren't able to, the lowest common denominator relative to the technical systems behind unemployment meant that instead of making a policy objective of putting people at essentially a 1-for-1 or an 8 out of 10 sort of recovery of their salary dollars, they had to just put a flat number nationally onto the system. So this idea of it's unemployment plus $600 is really a weird artifact of some computer programming issues. It's like a version of the Y2K bug almost. But it creates some problems, right? So Virginia, that number actually puts people a little bit above average. There are some states where that hits right on about the average, and there are some states where it's a little bit below average. So weird stuff going on there, but essentially, the tide has come in. We're still up to our neck in the water, and we're throwing out life preservers, right? And we're sort of doing our best to help the people who aren't strong swimmers. There's some issues too, right? Did the did the people who really need the life preservers get the life preservers, and have we fixed that either? And I don't have a good answer for you there. So there's a lot of issues in sort of sorting out the chaos of the rescue phase. I think when I think about the recovery phase, and this gets to, the groundhog analogy about sort of sticking our head out now. I'm gonna mix all my metaphors because that's one of those things I do, I guess. Does the groundhog swim? Are groundhogs good swimmers? I don't know. But anyway, as we get ready to go back, there's been a lot of attention to when, but I think, what I'm also hearing a lot about now is how, right? How do you go back in ways that your customers will have confidence about? How do you go back in ways where your employees will be safe, and you won't have liability? And some of that can be done, there's talk about, doing some things legislatively, and that's all good and well. But again, think about, my family member and, her banking experience. That is going to put an indelible stamp on the relationship she has with any financial services provider going forward. So I think this question of the recovery and how we go back is crucial, not just as a phase to get through, which we all want to do, but also as a phase to get through right. So it was mentioned, the Go Virginia program. My office actually staffs and organizes that. That's some of you may have been on talks where I've plugged that before, and I won't go deep into that right now. But just in brief, it's a program that's state program, but it sends money essentially to regional councils. And my office is staffed to a group that's chaired by Ray Smoot, and has a lot of other folks from the Newer Valley, Roanoke Valley, and Lynchburg. And they get a certain amount of money each year, and we can't write checks individually to businesses, but we can write checks to organizations like chambers, like workforce training organizations, like health districts, who can provide assistance to that helps businesses get back to work. And the states actually put some extra money in our hands to do that. And one of the first things that we funded was a project organized by Virginia Tech's medical school that you may have seen in the papers. Virginia Tech is, in this part of the state, had a couple of certified labs that would be qualified to do processing for COVID testing. We're also working on creating a new test that wasn't part of the, there were some issues where some of the initial tests were not good in some way, or were corrupted scientifically. We're not giving accurate results. So they're working also on a new test, and basically we've given them from Go Virginia some resource to hire about 50 lab techs at 2 locations in Blacksburg and Roanoke. And again, and they're going to work with the workforce boards and the community colleges to identify and essentially train these lab techs up. And right now they're running these labs with volunteers from our med school and students and such. And they can run about 40 tests a day. And by the time we get them staffed up, we're going to be up to about 1,000 tests a day, at least. And we may go beyond that with additional money that may come from Virginia Tech or from federal sources. So having that ability to test close by with rapid turnaround, as long as we can get the materials for testing, will allow us to identify more about where people are, will help us help you, keep sick people and healthy people apart. It's not the only piece of the puzzle. And I know there are some other things kind of in the pipeline. I know your chamber is working hard on some ideas about planning for business assistance coming out of this. I think, there's some good meetings going there, and there may be some things Go Virginia can support there, but other agencies as well. I know your local governments, and some of them are on the line here too, have gotten together with the health district and other partners And I know we're looking at some ways to provide a vetted, organized way for you to respond from a health and sanitation issue relative to any COVID exposures in your business or workplace. And I think those are a part of this. How do we get back? I know in other programs we've talked to some folks about assistance in providing transition to telework. It's all of a sudden we've all of us as managers, and I manage a staff of about 12 in mostly in Blacksburg, but in a couple of other locations too. All of us as managers have gotten a crash course on teleworking, but it's easier said than done in some instances. And I know, I was lucky enough that most of my folks had good broadband where they happen to be, although one person who's on our team is needed a little help getting her broadband kind of squared away. So we were able to help from an equipment perspective there. So that's, again, thinking about how to get back to work safely, profitably, healthfully, if that's a word, I think is a part of this recovery phase, right? We're pulling people out of the water, we're getting them up in the boats, we're all starting to row together, right? Sharon, I'm assuming like you were in a coastal flood zone or something, but you'll correct me later if I get the hurricane metaphors wrong, because I've never been in one. But this third phase is the one where we got to put some brain cells together. So after we've figured out everybody's back in the boat, we're rowing together. We want to make our way to some shore, right? We want to get to land. And when we do that, we need to think about not just, rebuilding the old, we need to rebuild the old opportunities, right? So, if your workforce has been dramatically disrupted and you're running a, manufacturing facility and you've had people laid off long enough that you've lost track of some of them. Maybe there's training that needs to be done to get new people back in place, right? Any kind of disruption can be addressed. But, out of a crisis like this, we really are, I think, having discussions in different communities around the state and around the country about new opportunities, right? We've all watched the dramas around medical supply chain and hunting for personal protective equipment and just crazy stuff. I know we're looking at, and I know individuals with 3D printers, Henry and others have gotten involved in printing masks, and companies have done this. Virginia Tech's put some volunteer efforts together. We have opportunities, I think, and we're also looking at this through Go Virginia, but some other programs as well, to help manufacturers retool around this sort of supply. Out in Floyd, Hollingsworth and Vose makes a lot of novel and unique special materials, some of which are appropriate, for example, for that kind of supply chain. Putting them together with production partners and others is maybe one example of how something like that might fit, right? There are other supply chains where disruptions have happened that maybe we can reshore opportunities around. Maybe we can, bring pieces of our transportation equipment manufacturing supply chain back. And across the New River Valley and in Montgomery County, we've got, not just Volvo down the road in Dublin, but we've got, Federal Mogul and Corning and a lot of other folks that are part of really complicated supply chains that make trucks and cars and other vehicles, and figuring out how to maybe make them more resilient by bringing things closer is something that, the business case has been presented to us through this crisis. So thinking about resilient supply chains is an area where new opportunity may come out of all of this. But we don't know also what the new thing may be. But now is the time to be thinking, right? We've got the life preservers out there. We're ready to start getting people on the boat. What's that shore we want to go to? In the last recession, my office actually, with some federal grant making help and some contributions from Volvo, worked with a couple, 3 dozen suppliers and folks from our College of Engineering on product development, process improvement projects for supply chain for Volvo. And as a part of that, they have made a big effort over the years to bring more suppliers into our region. So I think, there are going to be resources out there for projects like that. We're not completely on our own for supporting things like that, although for thinking about it, right? The ideas have to come from us. And by that, I mean you and me and everybody in the region. No one is going to tell us what the right move is. So I have totally lost track of time. So I do have Sharon in my view window, and I know she's gonna start like making a face at me if I need to hurry up, but I'm almost at the end, I think. So I was a little dismissive about all the noise on the internet, and I know I find it useful, but I also find it a little exhausting sometimes, and I have to ration how much Twitter I can have any given day. And I will say that, there's you can read a lot of hot takes on the internet. This is the end of retail. This is the end of globalization. This is the end of higher education in person. And I would be skeptical of anybody whose headline begins, "This is the end," right? For 2 reasons. I guess number one, trends exist before a crisis. I think a crisis will accelerate a trend, and will test the reasons for thinking about it, right? And I think the other thing is that that's an exciting headline, and everybody on the internet is really just trying to get your eyeballs looking at their content, right? So take those all with grains of salt, but realize there are a few things and that I think are important to this region, and we've already alluded to some of them. So a lot of you, particularly in retail or restaurants, will have already gone through enhancing your online capabilities, right? And there are some technical assistance resources through the SBDC, through some of your trade groups and others, to help make that kind of pivot. And I know the Chamber's been great supporters of takeout, and I took a couple of pictures. I didn't win the takeout hashtag competition, but I was happy to participate. But this, the online piece of anybody brick and mortar now is something that is probably going to become more important. And particularly if we have, a second flash of this in the fall, or even if it's a small flash, but maybe happens at the same time as the regular flu, your consumers are going to have a lot of, I would argue, somewhat justifiable anxiety. I didn't think about risk factors that I have or my family until we really all started talking about those, right? And so I think people are much more aware of those now and are going to be a little cautious. So your ability to make that online connection with them, that delivery connection, that curbside pickup connection, that's not going to go away. And I think it's reasonable to assume that in some fashion that's going to stay with us. I mentioned this question of onshoring. This is not at all a new idea. One of the first projects that my economic development studio class ever did, we did a statewide study on what we called farm shoring. And this was back in the early 2000s, and we were seeing a lot of examples of what you might also have called domestic outsourcing. So things where the federal government was at the time pressing contractors to move more activities outside of what I hate to say was called the blast zone post 9/11. And so, we saw a lot of data centers moving downstate and other things. So that was a dynamic that was with us for a while, hasn't really gone away. We still have a lot of offshore stuff in manufacturing, and the business case for that is something that's been tested in different waves and in different sectors, and it's played out. Where again a Volvo, which makes a very heavy product, wants to have more parts suppliers close to home to reduce cost, right? This crisis is going to create a whole new set of conditions to think about, and manufacturing supply chain managers are right now, as we speak, thinking about that. What that looks like 5 years from now, or what sectors that's more important to than others, I wouldn't want to say. But again, this onshoring thing is certainly going to be with us. Now, the gap year, Sharon did mention higher ed is a not insubstantial chunk of the regional economy. And it's certainly for folks, in business in Blacksburg and other places around Montgomery County, that's a whole lot of consumers you want to have come into town. Whether it's the students, the football, or other travel associated with the university, it's a big deal. And now what you're hearing a lot about now is well, we all managed to do online education for a semester. And kudos, I was so lucky. I would have been teaching this semester. I didn't get enough registration to qualify my class, so I gave it up. But for my colleagues who were, it was a crazy time to have a moment to take all the stuff that was planned for face-to-face and move it online. That's gonna be with us, right? And I will say, Virginia Tech had a presence. We weren't as early into it as some schools, but we had a presence, we had capacity, and we've certainly built that up. What we do for our consumers, and I know we're all watching enrollment figures, and there have been some things in the news lately about, in fact, I think there was an article in the Richmond newspaper, a column from a guy named Jeff Shapiro, about what's kind of a scramble that's been going on. So, Virginia Tech usually has about 1,000 international undergraduates in a given year. And that number this year is much, 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 much smaller. And from a consumer point of view, international students or out-of-state students are great consumers because at the local level, they come and buy stuff. Particularly the international students come with a suitcase, and if they stay and get an apartment or whatever, they're setting up homes from scratch, essentially. So that's a lot of numbers out of our economy, but also the international and the out-of-state students pay a full freight. So that's a lot of numbers out of Virginia Tech's bottom line. So when you see President Sands talking about our budget issues, this is one of the big things he has to work to kind of balance around. Our enrollment looks strong. Our in-state enrollment looks strong. And Virginia Tech does have an ability to draw from its wait list. We have a great market position, right? That does negatively impact some of our good colleagues elsewhere in the higher ed system. For those of us who've had, and I have a student who's supposed to go to VCU this fall, art major, she does not like the idea of beginning an arts education online. So we'll see how that goes. But it ripples, right? I mean, we're not, some people are talking about encouraging what's called a gap year between high school and college for kids who may want a work experience or something else. Some people on the internet are talking a lot about, and I think in communities and other parents I know are talking about, starting in community college closer to home, where safety and other issues aren't a concern, or cost is substantially less. And I think this is a great option, or a gap year might be an option for your kids too. However, now our friends in the community college side of the equation are going to have to ramp up really quick, and they can do it. But a month ago, they were scrambling because as the economy got good, their enrollments tend to be kind of cyclical often. So they're going to be stressed to figure out how to adjust to this additional capacity. So the higher ed marketplace is a crazy thing, and I think it's going to be impacted. I do think we'll see what the president announces in a few weeks, but I do think a lot of institutions around the country and around Virginia are talking about a hybrid approach to the fall, and that again is like in-person instruction is I would argue it's not likely to completely ever go away, but more hybridization and some changes are going to be with us. And I think that was, my goodness, that was my last slide. And my goodness, I've talked for a really long time. So I'm happy to spend a little more time with you if Sharon permits us to take a question or two, but I'll leave that in her capable hands. Let me take my screen down.
Thanks, John, for all the great information. Yeah, if you have questions, you can either unmute yourself or put those in the chat box right now, and I'm happy to read them out. We have about 3-4 more minutes for questions.
Okay, so I've at least left you, we don't have all the answers, but I guess my goal today was to, make you not nervous the next time you open up the internet.
John, I have a question for you, and I think it's a question that a lot of our members have. We're vulnerable. And yes, all communities are vulnerable, but how can we rally local residents? And I know some of that is consumer confidence. It's about creating as safe an environment as possible for our customers to feel good coming into. But there have to be some other things that we can do, John. One of the things that I've read is buying online has become a habit now. We've been in this situation for 45 to 30 days, 30 to 45 days. And it's not so bad. The not so bad is it's delivered to your front door. There's a convenience factor. The bad is if it's not coming from a local store, that tax is not coming to this community. So, and that funding helps support our schools. It helps support public safety. And taking the tax out of it, every one of our small businesses provides a service that is important to our community. How do we engage the residents to understand, hey, we've got to be out there. We've got to support local businesses, and by local, I mean a business that is located in Montgomery County, not just small, but thank goodness that Lowe's and Home Depot and our grocery stores are open, because there's some taxes being collected there, not necessarily the level that we once had, but how do we shore up our local economy, John?
Oh my gosh, Sharon. So no small task here for 4 minutes, but I do think that, not only does the money that stays local goes into tax coffers, but what's called a multiplier to your local expenditures is different than the expenditures out of town, right? Because the local money recirculates more or less, it leaks outside of your economy. And I know there's some local government folks on the line too, and I'm sure they are glad to hear the plug for, keeping the local tax base together. The structure, the state's financial structure too is, there's a lot of commercial real estate ups and downs that are also tied to, how we do that piece. So I think, our local governments, all our community organizations can really get together on this local marketing, this buy local kind of piece in a stronger way than ever. I mean, we've all done that kind of work before, shop small and all these other things. But I think if people are also thinking about staying closer to home, I mean, one of the ideas about, the gap year argument is not just, I mean, it's about cost, it's about safety, and it's about, being nervous having to send my kids away, right? So we're all going to be, I think, psychologically a little more insular as consumers. So that opportunity as a part of any collective effort around business assistance. I mean, I think this shouldn't just be about, providing you with, I think there's technical assistance people need for business planning and other things. But I think, and I think online is like part of that too, by the way, is making sure you're optimizing your opportunities in that space. But I think, a collective effort, just marketing our geographies, our downtowns, our business districts, but really, from kind of a sectoral view, thinking about how restaurants and hospitality interact. I think you're going to find consumer appetite wanting to not just support you because it's the right thing to do, but support you because you are closer to home. If that makes any sense. So I think any effort collectively to look at business assistance that doesn't have that marketing component to it. Yes, we need safe spaces. And again, I think, and I'm seeing a couple of other good questions in the chat too. So let me see if I can sort of weave in, one or two of those. So I know, again, some of the, I know some of the localities are coming together on a proposal with the health district about a coordinated effort to respond. So I think I don't have it to share yet, and I haven't reviewed it yet, but I do think that there's an effort in this region among your localities and your health districts and other partners to be able to work with both public sector and private service providers around sanitation and health and safety at the workplace. So I think that's a good example of something that's going to, where this region, I think, could be, and this community could be a leader. I think that's going to be something that we'll probably see come forward. Again, I mentioned your efforts, and the Chamber, I know, is working on some ideas about a coordinated way to provide enhanced support to individual businesses. And as I just said, I'd urge this to have this kind of collective marketing component to it too. Again, not to persuade people just to blindly run out and ignore their fears, but to really recognize that, we're all safer. What was some states they said, not just a stay-at-home order, but a safer at home order. Montgomery County is our home, right? And so shopping at home would be safer. I'm going to, if that helps, I've got the chat in front of me here, and I'm going to have to take a pass on anything about enrollment goals, and let people way above my pay grade announce that in somewhere down the line here. I think we've talked a little bit about safety. I know, there are model programs that I've seen pitched about online, and I'm not as plugged in today as to how far that's disseminated in Montgomery County. But I know there's some models both out of the SBDC network and nationally that I've seen on some trade group webinars that I think we can bring to bear. And am I missing anything else? Because no, I think this is great. Well, I guess this larger question of how are other communities and governments kind of getting together. So, what I'm seeing, and I'm really deeply tied, we've got 3 different regions we serve as a part of Go Virginia. And then I have offices, not just here in Blacksburg, but up in Arlington and in Hampton Roads. And I'd say we're as strong as anybody in terms of this getting together. Besides throwing out the life preservers, the first response to a lot of this has been information about how to get them, right? And technical assistance about how to participate in those assistance programs. So, I do think there are some other models we can take a look at as we go forward with some of these recovery efforts. But I think the effort to share and disseminate information, whether it's on the health side, what's been going on there, whether it's on the chamber side, has been nothing short of excellent. And I'm not just saying that because we're 6 minutes over and Sharon's smiling faces in the middle of my checkerboard here, but I really do think, my hat's off to the chamber and really the chamber statewide. I mean, we're plugged in at my different office locations to the chambers, and I think they've been good leaders in all of this stuff.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to pass it over to Josie at this time.
John, thank you again for your time and all the information that you shared with us. I hope everyone found value in what John said. He had a lot of really great information. Thank you again to Carolyn and Draper Aiden for sponsoring today. We so appreciate you and your investment in the chamber and in the community. Next month will also be virtual, and Mark Blanks will be speaking on drones and the effect they have on the larger economy as well. We also have a lot of great programs and meetings, a lot of wonderful resources. So keep an eye out on your Monday morning message, the newsletter, and as always, our website. Thank you again for your time and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Bye, guys.